I guess we can get started. So, welcome to this month's episode of African Liberty Webinars. I am Nthakomwa. It is my first time hosting the webinar. I am one of the writing fellows for the 2020 to 2021 class, and also the communications intern. And today I am joined by Gabriel Crouse, who is with the Institute for Race Relations. He's a writer and analyst. And I'm also joined by Phumlani Majozi, who is a South African journalist and a senior fellow with African Liberty. So our topic for today is unemployment in South Africa. So this year, the quarterly labor force survey showed that unemployment in South Africa had hit a record high, going as high as 30.1%. And this was the first time in history that South Africa has hit the 30% mark. And this had gone up from 29.1% in the quarter of last year. And while some of this can be attributed to COVID-19, it's no secret that the country was already in recession prior to the pandemic. And in general, I think over the past decade, the issue of unemployment in South Africa has been a long-standing conversation. So I guess maybe starting with you, Phumlani, just wanting to find out, since this has been such an ongoing conversation that's just been exacerbated by COVID-19, what would you pinpoint as the actual cause of unemployment in South Africa, which is arguably the most advanced economy in Africa?
So much, Tando, and it's an honor to be here to join you guys to talk about the most important issues in Africa. It's always a pleasure. The number, Tando, you mentioned, that I think you mentioned 30%. That number was the number, and Gabriel will correct me here, that was the number before COVID-19 sort of reached South Africa. So this was the first quarter, we hit 30%. The numbers after COVID-19, or since COVID-19 came in, I think the numbers are more than 40% now, because they had to factor in the second quarter, which was a huge disaster in terms of, job losses. So the numbers have gone very high in comparison to the number that you mentioned earlier. And your question was, what are exactly the driving forces behind these high levels of unemployment? Well, it's a debate, right? It's an issue that is being discussed in South Africa, and depending on which sort of ideological, political spectrum you come from, you are going to give sort of, some reasons, depending on which sort of space you come from. So, but in my observation, which is what you are looking for, what do I see? What are the reasons? Well, there are many factors in South Africa that play into this. And one of them, I think the most fundamental one, is the lack of robust, speedy, rapid economic growth, right? Because when you look at South Africa's data since 1994, right, this is 26 years for our democracy. When you look at economic growth and unemployment, right, there was a pattern up until 2008 or 9 or so. There's a pattern in the sense that when you have strong or stronger economic growth, you would have lower levels of unemployment, right? So that's what you see when you look at the patterns on unemployment and the economy after 1994 in South Africa. But since 2008-9 or so up until today, numbers have been are doing something very bad. In other words, because of low economic growth, we've seen unemployment rising and rising. That has been accompanied by high levels of government spending, high levels of government debt, borrowing over the past decade or so has been sort of continuously rising in South Africa. So the lack of economic growth is quite fundamental. And we have, the reason why we have bad economic growth is for many reasons. One could be, we could point to the fact that the issues of regulations, the issues of, again, sort of government spending, the issues of taxes that are in place. We also have the issues of Eskom, the state-owned power utility that consistently, sort of fails to meet demand when it comes to electricity. There are also some issues that are not mentioned much in South Africa that are sort of, people tend to run away from them, and I'm not sure why. These are issues of things of the labor market. There's so much that's going on that is not right. The labor cost, when you compare it by various studies, including the World Bank, it's been determined that labor costs in South Africa, they are quite higher compared to other emerging markets, right? So as a result, you tend to find that for companies to hire, to maintain people, there are just some costs, right? So we are not competitive enough that are involved. So we are not competitive enough compared to other countries. We also have labor unions in the country that are fierce, that always demand more restrictions in the labor market, policy going in their direction. So all those things as well, you can't take them out of, you can't take them off the list of the factors that are impacting job creation in South Africa and unemployment. So that's in a nutshell what I can give and what I know and what I've seen as someone who watches these things quite closely.
Thank you for that, Phumlani. I think you've said quite a few insightful things, and something that just, I guess, strikes out to me is the issue of policy. And I guess coming to you, Gabriel, South Africa's economic policy framework, how does this contribute to the current unemployment crisis?
So I think that to answer that question, if I can just take a step backwards to talk about how bad the crisis is, I was just trying to look up StatusA's quarterly labor force survey for Q2 2020 to get the numbers exactly right. But basically what happened is that our unemployment rate climbed up to 29%, 30%, 29% at the end of last year, looked like 30% this year in Q1. And then bizarrely, the official unemployment rate dropped from 30% to 23% in Q2 2020. So that's as the pandemic hits, unemployment goes down. But the reason for that is the official unemployment rate is only for people who are looking for a job but don't have a job.
Yes.
And what really happened is millions stopped looking for work because it was just so hard to find. They weren't allowed to go out. So the actual number of the labor absorption rate and the sort of expanded definition unemployment rate, those are where you see the worst effect in 2020. And the upshot of that is, if you look at people aged 34, 35, or so, 50% of South African work, only 50%. And if you look at South Africans between, I think it's 14 and 35, 50% are either not in employment, and the worst sector is, if you look, kind of people around my area are currently out of work, and many have given up on looking for work. So it's a really bad situation, and that contributes to being frustrated to the point where you can't even look for work. You don't even see a way to look for work. It's very concerning. Part of it's the pandemic. Part of it is policy, which is what you asked about that came before. One of the things that's difficult to deal with is this idea that the government, the reason we have high unemployment is because the government hasn't hired enough people. If the government just hired more people, it's got lots of money. If it just hired more people, then more people would be in employment. As Tito Mboweni, our Minister of Finance, argued in his midterm budget speech, I think a week or two ago, there was some room to believe something like that in 2008, when we had very low debt, we'd been running budget surpluses, the civil service was smaller, and so for every extra rand that the government spent, even if whether it was spending it on someone doing a really good job or not, just putting that extra rand into the system, that person would buy something else with a rand, that would buy something else with a rand. That would have a net productive effect. And now, with our debt level so high, it has a net shrinkage effect. So just the debt is one of the problems. The fact that we've borrowed money to not add value. Another one of the problems, so for the government to hire more people, it's a crisis. And the reason I say that is because I think if you ask ordinary South Africans in the last couple of weeks, what's the policy issue front of mind? Bizarrely, they would say, which is such a small thing. On the budget, why are we still bailing out SAA? And yet there's a paradox. We've got high unemployment and people want more people to be fired, right? So how does that make sense? We've already got high unemployment, but we want to fire more people. That's going to make unemployment worse. No, I think ordinary South Africans understand that if you're paying someone to do a job and they're not doing their job, then you need to fire them because that's not a job being done, right? And that's not to say everyone at SAA is not doing their job. It's to say that organization with a lot of hard workers is being so badly managed for the last 20 years that billions in bailouts have produced a strain on the system that's crunching them. And then I'll just say one more thing. So SAA kind of stands for state-owned enterprises more broadly, and the policy of addressing the unemployment issue by just the government hiring more people and why that doesn't seem to have been working here. And then just the third one is labor regulations. I'm just going to go with the hardest point. I think I think this is a hard point to think about. The minimum wage. I think it's very natural. People want to work, but when they work, they want to get a reward for that work that's meaningful. And that's where the idea for a minimum wage comes. You can't be paying someone so little that they can't live off it. So you want a living wage. As a result of this kind of humanitarian concern, we have mandated a national minimum wage last year of 3,500 Rand a month. And if you translate that into dollar terms, if you translate that into global terms, it's not a lot of money. At the same time, Stats SA's data shows from 2017 that the median wage in South Africa was 3,500 Rand. That means 50% of people earning money are basically earning an illegally little amount of money. Now, part of that's because there's part-time work issues. Part of it is that in agriculture, there's a slightly different minimum wage, so it's not a true national minimum wage. But part of it is that South Africa has a very asymmetrical skills base. We have extremely bad public schooling. It's one of the greatest concerns. And people are not going to hire people to do a job and pay them 4,000 Rand if they're not adding more than 4,000 Rands worth of value to their business. And that requires skills. So what South Africans need, in my opinion, is to be able to get in at any level. If school has let you down, you need to get a job at any level, and then you can grow from there. That's how I did it as a journalist. As a freelance journalist, minimum wage doesn't apply. I was earning 1,500 Rand a month because I could get one piece placed in a newspaper in a month, but that's what I got. And then you eat a morogo and pap, and you put your nose to the grindstone, and then you grow. And I managed to grow, and I think that's a good path. But it's being denied because of a minimum wage law that on the surface looks very sympathetic to poor people, but is really making it much harder for unemployed people, millions and millions, 2 million newly unemployed people in the last 3 months, but millions more over the last few years to get back into business. Because employers have to say, if I can't pay you 3.5 a month, if I just want to pay you 2.5 and see how you do, to see if I can get you to 3.5, and from there to 4.5, from there to 10, as you become a manager or whatever. They can't do that, or they can do it, but illegally. So that's a particular law that frustrates me, because I think if you say, I don't want a minimum wage law, then you sound like, you sound brutal. You sound like you don't care about poor people. You sound like you
that's
think
what
it's to live on 3.5.
what I've
But
been
it's,
told,
but it's,
Gabriel, many times that I don't care about people.
but it's a nightmare to stop people from being able to work at a competitive rate where they can afford to do it. So those are sort of three big buckets. The idea of government helping the solution by hiring more people, the idea of government-owned enterprises doing the same, but ultimately creating a drain on the fiscus, both of them creating a debt situation which strains our ability to do real value add, and then regulation with that one particular example. I think those are some of the issues. Another big thing to talk about is education, but I'll put it.
Gabriel, I think you muted yourself, but I guess maybe I can still come in now. I think you've touched on a couple of very important points, and just different ways I also wanted to go in this discussion. And one of the issues that you talked about was the issue of jobs being provided by the public sector. And I was looking at Cyril Ramaphosa's economic recovery plan, which intends to provide about 800,000 jobs, and these 800,000 jobs seem to be based in the public sector as well. So yeah, Phumlani, do you have any thoughts on this plan as it's been set out so far?
Yeah, but before I get to your point, I want to add to what Gabriel spoke about, the issue of education, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I have noticed in South Africa, right, is that, or what I've read, is that depending on your level of skills or education, right, your wage or your income changes accordingly, right? So in other words, people who don't have high school education, they earn less than people who have a graduate degree, right? People who have a high school education, they earn less than people who have tertiary education. People who have no education at all, earn less than people who have a high school education and a tertiary education. So there is that kind of a pattern, right? Which I think is a usual kind of familiar pattern in economics, right? It's one of the reasons why I have for many times, right, argued that if South Africa's government is serious about addressing the jobs crisis and improving people's incomes, education and skills development, I think is very important, right? You need to create the groundwork so that people's incomes, they change as per that pattern I just mentioned now, right? Instead of sort of manipulating the market, as what Gabriel was saying, implementing a national sort of minimum wage or any minimum wage of that sort. I'm not in favor of any kind of minimum wage, right? Because I don't believe that it's something that works, and I don't believe that it's something South Africa needs, given that we have the most shocking levels of unemployment in the emerging markets, right? In the emerging markets. So we don't need those laws. Rather focus on creating skills development, education, and just making sure that people are upskilled to be competitive, and so that they add value in the market. Now, you asked about the state being the job creator, right? Now, Gabriel has touched here on many things, including the fact that there's this idea in South Africa of government hiring people, and that's been the case since 1994. Now, I'm saying since 1994 because we usually in South Africa start at 1994 point as a reference for almost anything in this country. So that's why I'm using that starting point. So there has been this drive in South Africa for the state to be the employer, right? We are indebted. The debt has been rising and rising over the past decade and years because government is basically trying to employ people. The reason why they want to bail SAN in all these sort of troubled government-owned companies is because part of it is that we want people to be employed. There are unions who also pressure them. Unions are saying, labor unions, please, we don't privatize, or unions push back on almost any kind of sort of reform in this country. I'm talking about a pro-market, economic reform. So they push back for many reasons. So I'm saying there has been this sort of wrong drive where we've accumulated more debt, and government has been trying to be the employer. And in Ramaphosa's recovery plan, that's what you sense, right? And that's what he has said numerous times over the past months. That's, I want the state to be the driver of this economy. I'm saying no, you don't need the state to be the driver, right? The state must sort of try by all means to be off the driving seat, right? Try by all means, rather let business take over, right? Now, some people say, well, there's been COVID-19, what do you mean? I'm saying, don't things like lockdown, don't do them, right? Because, it's not going to help us, right? And we don't need to go that route for many reasons around the pandemic. But rather encourage that precautions are being taken, and you try to make business to be the driver. Things like tax breaks as well, give those things. Deregulate, so that these guys, they don't need to face the cost of any kind of regulation. So you make business to be at the forefront of the recovery. And remember that if government creates jobs, as we've seen, it basically means more debt. We are a broke country. Even the president did a few months back say that we are a broke country. We no longer have the money, right? So if you still want to create jobs for whatever reason, you need to get money from somewhere. So it will be the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or local lenders or the African Development Bank, wherever it may be. So that means, again, we are accumulating more debt because we are making the state to be the driver. And by the way, these infrastructure jobs, which is what the ANC preaches almost every now and then, really, they are not sustainable jobs, right? How much money have we been throwing over the past decades into infrastructure programs? And in that period, guess what? Unemployment skyrocketed. It shot up. It's quite funny, right? That you are spending billions of rands or dollars into creating jobs. That's what you allocate almost every year. But your unemployment is shooting up. So where is the money going? So it's a very wrong approach.
It's a paradox. Some guys are making money at the top, eh?
Well, yeah, I think you are right in that. Some guys are getting rich, but it's not a sustainable thing to do. So it's a flawed approach to make the state the driver. There has to be, we need to think business. Some must think from a business point of view and understand the limits of government's capabilities. And I think we fail in that. And it's said that we fail even at this point, where the economy is basically dead. South Africa's economy is dead right now, to be honest with you. It's a dead economy. For politicians to continue to say that the state should be the driver is it troubles me. There's still more spending going on. Government still want to spend more. There's no relaxation of regulations. There's no privatizations. Taxes will go up over the next, I think, 3-4 years, Gabriel. Taxes are going up. How do you hike taxes in a repressed and dead economy? Where are you going to get the economic growth that I was talking about that will reduce the high levels of unemployment? For me, that's the most fundamental thing. Yes, I speak about labor laws. I speak about that. But the fundamental thing is you need to have a robust economic growth to reduce the high levels of unemployment. And we are missing that formula, I think, for ideological reasons.
Okay. No, thank you so much, Phumlani. I think one thing that definitely has come out very clear from both of you is that government doesn't need to be the key driver in the conversation around employment. What it needs to do is just make sure that the private sector has a market that is open to them to actually create this employment, with government not having to regulate so much. But I guess another thing that I am getting from the both of you is the issue of the labor policies in South Africa. And what I'm seeing is the labor policies in South Africa discourage people from employing unskilled labor on the one hand, but also you did talk about the training institutions and the school and just the education system, I think, if I got you correctly. And I guess realizing that employment growth does not only depend on economic growth, but the formation of a strong human capital base. But at the same time, you've got a very large pool of unskilled labor and institutions that aren't helping this populace. What then is a way forward to bridge this gap? Gabriel.
So I think that there are strong signs of a route out of the problem. And this is a problem that I think is grounded in our apartheid legacy, because part of the awful idea of the ideology of apartheid and the way it was manifested was to deliberately make schooling poorer for some people than it was for other people. There was a deliberate attempt to manipulate the labor market, and part of the reason for that was that the sort of white nationalist government had noticed that it's quite hard to force employers to not hire the best person for the job. Like, some employers have a taste-based racism, but a lot of employers were like, oh man, some people are just adding more value to my business than others, and I'm gonna hire them even if the government says don't do that. And so they were hiring black people, promoting black people, making black people managers, even when that wasn't like an acceptable thing to do. And so the government decided to try and deliberately make education worse to counterbalance that. And that created, I think more than anything else, an anti-authoritarian attitude towards schooling. And it's a very important thing about South Africa's history that in 1976, when the final wave of the struggle really awakens, it is from school students who are very inflamed and infuriated with the apartheid government. And schools become a place of struggle, and authority becomes a thing to resist. And I think that was appropriate in its time, but it stopped being appropriate today. And yet that anti-authoritarian strain has kind of persisted through to the teaching class. And in particular, I find a lot of frustration to be had at the South African SATU, but they've got a lot of at the syllabus, at rules. There are widespread anecdotal reports and studies about teacher absentee levels on Mondays and Fridays. So, okay, this is again the bad side, government running things. It had a problem. People who went to schools where they hated schooling for good reason, then becoming teachers who still hate schooling in a way, not doing a great job, yoked into a union. What's the solution? Well, low-cost private schooling has turned out in South Africa to be extremely successful. I can talk about some of the brands, but I'd rather leave their names out of it. But I've followed a series of sort of private ventures where schools are charging from a few hundred rand a month to like 1,000 rand a month, affordable for working class, lower middle class families. And the results that they've been getting are just day and night compared to our public schooling sector. The rate at which they're getting students to get into university, to get into training, technical colleges, and they've been going for long enough now that we're also seeing the data come through post-training into the workforce, and the dynamic value that they're adding to the labor market is very exciting. So I'm a strong proponent of further deregulating there. Part of the reason that I don't want to say any of their names in particular is I've spoken to some of the leaders of these schools, and they say our success has to be in the shade, because government officials have told us they're going to stop handing out licenses to open new schools if we advertise our success too loudly, because it'll undermine credibility in the public sector. So that's got to change. We've got to advertise to people like that there is an alternative, and government has to buy into the program. I think schooling vouchers, giving parents the right to decide where their kids go to school, and giving them the right to say, if the government is spending 15,000 Rand a year on a student, to say instead we'll give 12,000 Rand in a voucher that you can go redeem at any private school that'll take you. And then you can top it up with your own funds, or you can just use that voucher. That would save government money, which they could then use to pay down the debt. and it would be getting students into classrooms that are upskilling them rather than, I suppose, putting them actually in frank danger, putting them in physical danger, health and safety regulations. And, let's not forget David Mabuza, our deputy president, when he was on his way to Pretoria to be inaugurated, was fleeing school protests because yet another child had fallen into a pit toilet, this time had survived and not passed away, thank goodness. But the very real basic needs are not being met in our public schools and are being met at our voucher program, low-cost private schools. So I think that excites me. And when I visit those schools once every few months. I visit one of them. And that excites me about the future of this country. I think a solution like that would take us a long way. And I think that there is something like that going on in the tertiary education section in terms of training colleges. It's a little bit more nascent. It's a little bit more dislocated because government regulation is harder to get around. But I think that's very important. I think it's very exciting. And then on the job skills training, I work for the Institute of Race Relations, and we've been advocating for an empowerment for the economically disadvantaged rather than
Gabriel, I'm not sure if it's just me, but your connection isn't very clear.
Empowerment to find people, incentivize businesses to train them on the moment there, but I'm hearing you now. I think I wrapped my points. I was just saying that incentivizing businesses to pay for people's education or upskilling on the basis of how educated they are, what kinds of schools they went to, rather than sort of a racial cookie counter approach, I think would also be very exciting and helpful.
Just a quick point to make here. One of the reasons, I think Gabriel has mentioned something very important around sort of the pushback that we occasionally, or in many times, we've seen in South Africa from unions. And you've mentioned SADTU, Gabriel. I want to say the main reason why we are not seeing the reforms that will speed up economic growth, right? And by the way, make our society even more educated. You mentioned Gabriel speaking about education. It's because there is an alliance, right? I don't have an issue with unions. I believe in freedom of association. I believe in a free society, right? So I don't have an issue with unions, right? People can mobilize in whatever they want, in whatever way they want to mobilize. The biggest issue begins when the governing party or politicians, or maybe I should just say government or ANC government, sleeps on the same bed with unions, right? Including SADTU that Gabriel mentioned, and others in the labor sector, right? COSATU is one of them, and many others, I believe, right? So, I mean, if politicians sleep on the same bed with unions, we are not going to see reforms because unions have much influence in shaping public policy, right? And that's been the case in South Africa in the post-19 sort of over the past 25 years of our democracy. There has been an alliance of government, the ANC government, with unions. Now, the fundamental issues that are controversial, that I always talk about, right, which minimum wages, as Gabriel mentioned, the issue of deregulating the labor market, the issue of highlighting even the labor costs, the regulations in the labor market, even the Labor Relations Act that we have. People have been sort of concerned about the fact that the regulations there have been getting stronger and stronger for years, right? Now, you can't tell me that this government can touch on those controversial issues because they are going to anger the unions and lose the vote, right? So what happens is that the ANC, whenever they talk about reform, they run away from these sort of core controversial issues we need to get right, relating to unions and the labor market, and even education reform, as Gabriel was saying earlier. They run away from addressing the things that are controversial and making unpopular decisions around that, because unions aren't going to like that, right? And by the way, not only unions, I see this a lot on Twitter, where I need to face a battle every day, the hostility towards markets, right? Maybe I'm a bad communicator, and I accept that, and I am to an extent, right? But there's just this hostility that if you are saying you don't want minimum wages, then that means you want people, especially Black people, to be exploited, right? You want them to earn slave wages, right? So I mean, it's not just unions who sort of make noise around such things when they are being tackled, or if there's talk to be tackled. It's also the public as well. Many people out there who are saying no, but you can't relax regulations in the labor market because employees will be exploited. You see, you can't talk about labor costs because people are poor in this country. They pay X amount of money to get to a taxi, and we are talking about, and Phumlani, you are telling us that we have high labor costs and whatever. So I mean, that's why the ANC almost always, when they talk about getting the economy right, they talk all of these things that are, to me are totally not that important to get us moving forward. What is important is doing things that will be quite unpopular. Privatizations, right? Slashing of taxes, right? Reforming education, as Gabriel was saying. And those things are the unpopular things that need to be done, but they have to be done in order to get economic growth from 0%, where it is right now, basically, to plus minus 5%, which is what you need to sort of reduce these current levels of unemployment sort of significantly. So for me, it's politics in South Africa that is holding back sort of reforms. And whenever you see even intellectuals on TV, intellectuals in South Africa, when they talk about issues of the core sort of, they start talking about transformation, inclusivity, in an inclusive economy, all these fancy sort of titles, right? Developmental state, all these fancy titles that really you can't get anything from them if you don't have plus minus 4% or 5% economic growth. You need to have a strong economic growth first to have those things. But they get obsessed about things that are totally useless to me, and avoiding the core fundamentals, the issues that are unpopular that we need to tackle, right? So that's just my perspective on that.
Thank you, Phumlani. I see that you've spoken about reforms quite a bit, and that it just needs to be done. But I guess, like any reforms that need to take place, reforms take place over time. I'm sure it can't be all done at one go. So I guess wanting to understand from you guys which specific sectors in South Africa need more immediate reforms to help with the unemployment crisis. So just looking into the actual specific sector that needs immediate change, I guess.
With policy is not just that it's been bad, it's that it's about to get much worse. So this starts in the agricultural sector, which has become the political hot potato of South African discourse for the last 5 years, in particular since the advent of the EFF coming to Parliament. And in order to reform the land ownership patterns in South Africa, the government has embarked on a process of eroding property rights in a way that is not only bad for owners of all races, but also really bad for employees and people looking for work. Agriculture is a sector around the world which decreases in its share of GDP and employment as the country develops. So South Africa is not an exception to that. In 90, now it's something like 3% of GDP. But it's still a very important sector, in particular because it touches on the doorsteps of those South Africans who are most deprived of skills and job opportunities in any other sector because they're in rural heartland South Africa. So it's a really important one to get right. And the reforms that I would like to ask for in agriculture, which is sort of my beat as a journalist, would be to not have the kind of program Ramaphosa promised, which was 700,000 hectares of land being released to the public in the form of 30-year leases that aren't bankable leases. So the only way people getting those 700,000 hectares are going to do any farming is if they get their seed and their tractor and their petrol from the government, which means they're really just working for the government. And at the end of the 30 years, they don't even necessarily get to keep the land. And the land was supposed to be unoccupied land, but I've been to 2 of the farms on that list that are not unoccupied. They're being farmed. They're just being farmed by people that are critical of the government, black and white. And so now now the government wants to replace them. So that's the wrong way to go. What I'd like is title deeds being given to those people. I'd like to rightful owners of the land. I'd like to see the restitution process completed. Land that was taken away from people during apartheid has to be returned. 95% of that has happened. It's actually above 95%, but let's say roughly 95. The last 5%, the first 95% took 10 years. The last 15 years have been taken for the last 5%, because as soon as that goes away, the political story goes away too. But there are people sitting on those lists that I've seen, people that are turning 80. I've spoken to one family, the Mnyandus, where 2 of their members have now died, still fighting to get their land back, where the government's recognized everything, they just won't issue the title deed. It's to see the younger generation and how angry that makes them. It's counterproductive. It's dangerous. And it's undignified. So you need to give people title deeds rather than try and make the government again their employers. You need to improve infrastructure. You need to make sure that our ports and roads are working. And freight is hugely important in agriculture. It's also hugely important in manufacturing, which I would say is the bigger economy the bigger sector that needs to grow. But agriculture is kind of my baby because it's politically so significant. But our train lines, basically it costs more to get something from Johannesburg to Durban than it does to get it from Durban to Beijing or Sao Paulo, which is not the right way around. And again, it's because of a sort of artificial state monopoly on freight. So but the easiest win for all sectors right now, in my opinion, is just not to make things worse. So we're about to pass the expropriation bill, which says that property can be expropriated without compensation by the state in 5 private property in 5 scenarios, but not only in those 5 scenarios. It says including but not limited to these 5 scenarios. To quickly run through them, in the first scenario, if you buy land with the plan to sell it at a profit, and that's the primary way you intend to make money, the state can expropriate that without compensation. Apply that logic to stocks, bonds, businesses, and you see that's the end of at the end of kind of speculative trade that people who don't understand the importance of price signals sort of think of as just being a nasty way of the rich getting. If you've lost control over your land, then you can be expropriated without compensation. Now, I've been to farms that have been invaded. Again, farms owned by black and white people that have been invaded. They've called the police, control over their land. If this bill passes, then the government can rob you a second time. It's very, very distressing for any investor to get into that. It's so distressing that a lot of multiple generation investors in South Africa want to get out. that kind of undermining of the property rights system undermines capital. And remember,
I'm losing Gabriel.
Gabriel, sorry, your connection isn't very clear again.
We all need tools to do our right. We need computers to make that. I beg your pardon. I was just saying that capital is a fancy word for a tool. We all need tools to do our job. And as we chase away capital, which is what you do when you weaken property rights, you take away the tools that unemployed people need to join with their labor to add value. Workers need tools. Less tools means less work, which means less people have a job. So I think right now my number one policy recommendation is just don't make things worse. Don't pass the expropriation bill. That would really send, if that bill was stopped by the president, he has a veto right. He can veto that bill in parliament. If he were to do that, there would be a real reason to think of him as the genuine reformer that he has so long been advertised as. I think that markets locally and globally would take very seriously that move and would invest. So that's hoping. I'm not betting, but I'm hoping.
Thanks so much, Gabriel. I guess before I say anything else, maybe Phumlani, you can share on which sectors you also think need more immediate reform to positively contribute to the employment crisis in South Africa.
Well, manufacturing is one, tourism is one, financial services is one, mining is one. I think these are sort of telecommunications as well to an extent. So these are kind of important sectors in South Africa. They contribute a lot into our GDP. So, and I think for me, to reform those is not sophisticated at all, although it's made by South Africa's intellectuals to be sophisticated, to mention all these fancy terms, as I said earlier. For me, there, it gets back to, deregulate, give tax breaks, reform, all free market stuff that you need to do there, right? Don't make it hard for the companies there to hire people, right? Now, many in South Africa, they tend to sort of dismiss that approach of doing those things. But the question is, how are we going to have economic growth? You want economic growth, right? Because you want to reduce unemployment. You can't reduce unemployment with 1%. You can't reduce unemployment with sort of 0% economic growth. You need to have robust economic growth. And robust economic growth means reforming these industries I mentioned and many others, and also just making sure that things like expropriation of land without compensation that Gabriel has touched on, those things, don't even talk about those things. The fact that they're in a discussion, for me, really tells that our political elite are not getting this thing, right? There's a refusal to get it, and I also think there's cluelessness on the issues, on understanding what needs to be done. So for me, those are the key things that are quite fundamental. Those are sort of important industries we can sort of make an impact on, and the impact, again, is just exactly those basic things I mentioned that are very much free market.
I guess moving away from the discussion of policy and government involvement, some have said another big contributing factor to the unemployment crisis in South Africa is the issue of immigration. I hear there is large numbers of people from surrounding countries that are constantly coming into South Africa. I'm from Malawi, so I know how many people are coming into South Africa from Malawi. So that's one side of things. And then there has been the opinion that some say there is also an air of laziness I'm not sure what your takes are on this. So maybe you could quickly share. Maybe we start with you, Gabriel.
Thanks. Sorry, I hope my connection holds. In terms of immigrants, I think that if you don't have a strong border that's properly patrolled, then people don't trust. It undermines so much trust in the rule of law and in citizenship being a thing that it creates problems. But we're pointing the finger in the wrong direction when we say foreigners are taking our jobs. It's really clear from macro analysis to particular case studies in the CBD of Johannesburg and Pietermaritzburg and Alex and Soweto that foreigners are net value adders. In fact, because foreigners in South Africa tend to operate in parts of the informal economy that are the least regulated, but where there are gains to be made in retail, for example, they often end up becoming employers of South Africans. So either they're adding value by supplying goods and services to South Africans that we're voluntarily paying for, or they are adding value by hiring South Africans. So
Gabriel?
Yeah, I think we've lost you again, Gabriel. So maybe while we wait on Gabriel, Phumlani, you can come in on the same.
So we need to make sure that the system is straight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think Phumlani, you can come in and then while Gabriel sorts out his connection.
All right. So from my side, my view around immigration in South Africa. Firstly, it's very important. It needs to be understood that we need more immigrants in the country, right? We need immigrants to come here and contribute productively, right, in our economy. That's very important. That needs to be understood, right? Now, but then there is also a fundamental thing that we need to look as a country and for politicians to look at. And that is, if you have a country like South Africa that has many very low-skilled people, right? You have a lot of already low-skilled people. Since I'm looking at since 1994 in South Africa, the past 25 years of our democracy, they saw that there's an oversupply of low-skilled labor, right? So as a country, I think at this point right now, I think being in a position where we are able to say, okay, because we lack many skills in South Africa, right? But we have an oversupply of low-skilled kind of labor, right? But we don't have high supply of high-skilled labor. So that means then, as a country, you've got to look into how to control your movement in terms of the people moving into the country, the immigrants you need, right? So that you are able to address that challenge, right? So you are saying we need immigrants, but at this point right now, given the oversupply and the high levels of unemployment that we face as a country, right? And, as I'm saying, low-skilled labor that is just readily available everywhere. How to make sure that you get high-skilled immigrants to the country? How to make sure that that's the kind of, because we already have an oversupply, right? And that kind of policy has to be in place, in my view. So now, but I have a friend, Martin van Staren, a libertarian friend of mine. We clash a lot on this, right? Because that's where he pushes back and say, let competition be everywhere and I'm saying, no, Martin, you can't. You've got to have a bit of control, because, I mean, you face that kind of a landscape in South Africa, right? Where you have an oversupply of low-skilled people that are, in many ways, already saying the wage is low, right? Now, their reasons may be justified or not justified, but that's what they're already saying, right? That's what people are saying, that we are paid, even goes far as saying we are being paid slave wages and so on. So, I mean, if you need to control the kind of labor that is really, as a country, that we sort of we need at this point in time, and that will sort of shape our immigration policies as well as a nation. So that's the kind of, I think, South Africa that has to be at this point, in time.
Okay, thank you so much, Phumlani.
Now, just a quick point to make, Thando.
Okay.
Gabriel is right to say that there isn't evidence that, when foreigners come into a country, whether it's South Africa or whatever, that they take jobs. Rather, foreigners, they come and create jobs, right? That's been the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if though may have, and I remember this at one point, another economist was talking about it, was saying that what could happen though is that there might be a suppression because of the oversupply of that skill. There might be a suppression of the wage, right? As a result, wages are going to be lower and go down. So that could be that sort of the reason that I've seen that makes sense to an extent, right? Makes sense that I've seen being argued. But the argument that foreigners take jobs, that one really, there is no serious person who has agreed with that, who has done work on this thing.
All right. So I guess we are a little bit over time, but I guess just before we do wrap up, I guess, Gabriel, you didn't get to finish your thoughts. And I also had extended the question to say, some have said, on the other hand, there might be a mindset issue in South Africa where there may be a mindset of just laziness when it comes to employment. So maybe you can touch on this. I will say maybe under 3 minutes. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I'm so sorry about my poor line. So one of the things that I like to get people to try to think about is the esteem market. So we know the property market, that's where we buy and sell goods and services. And we know the power market, that's where you compete for votes, or you compete with guns in war. But in the esteem market, we compete with one another for kudos or likes. And in real terms, the way that this often takes shape is we try to find a way to live an honorable life. So one of the ways to do that is to pin your hopes on an ideological takeover that will vindicate your worklessness. And a lot of my friends in radical ultra-left parties are very ambitious and are, in a sense, very hardworking in that they put in a lot of hours. They'll go across the country to go and protest and march. They're not making things, and they often set things on fire, but they are keen. So their keenness is just being channeled through the esteem market to think the way that I get ahead, the way that I get likes, the way that I get respect is by antagonizing the property rights system, antagonizing free markets, by deriding people who work for 3,000 Rand a month and say, that's just slave wages, you're being taken for a ride. By dissing workers and celebrating revolutionaries, they rise up the ranks of the revolution. So I don't think it's laziness. I think that it's a misapplication of energy that happens at the extremes that also terrorizes people in the middle. There are a lot of South Africans, 500,000 of us have been killed in the last 25 years. If you go into the rural areas, people often talk about getting something and then it getting stolen just in time for you to get it again. So sometimes people don't feel that strongly motivated to make more material rewards for themselves because they think they'll be robbed. Again, by energetic people. So I don't think we have a lack of energy at all. I think we're just not respecting each other for the right things. And I think that creates perverse incentives.
All right. No, thank you so much for that. This discussion has generally been...
Can I add a point here around the issue of laziness, whatever. I don't think.
Please.
Sometimes I've got in trouble on Twitter. People saying that I sort of sell this idea that South Africans are lazy, and I'm saying no, that's not the case. But I do insist on hard work and personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say South Africans are lazy. I think that would be sort of wrong. But there is a culture of complaining and whining, and blaming somebody, and entitlement that is alive in my observation, right? So, and that culture of blaming some other people for our problems, it's there, right? It's rife in my observation. It's something that is really destroying us to an extent, because what happens is that the people who really should be blamed, and these are politicians in power, to an extent, people don't blame them. They continue voting for them, right? And rather blame other people, blame things like, we still blame apartheid. Yes, apartheid needs to be acknowledged. It had effect on our country. It's had effect on our country. But there are things that you really can't blame apartheid for, right? There is always this blame of white monopoly capital, white people. In many instances, I've seen that it's white people, they have the money, only if they can give the money, stop sitting on top of the money and put it into creating jobs. So that culture of always sort of, it's somebody else. It's and the entitlement culture of, we're entitled to all things free, right? If you don't give us things that are free, well, then we are going to ban clinics, we will vandalize the roads, we will do whatever to destroy the country. And that culture is there, and it troubles me. Whenever I mention it, I get into trouble, but I have to be. It's what I'm saying, and I think it's hurting us.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for both of your very helpful insights, as well as your honesty in answering questions. I think I really appreciate that. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, we've run for about an hour, and I just wanted to thank you both so much for being a part of this discussion. It's great to see that as much as unemployment is a crisis, it's not a crisis that is beyond hope in South Africa, and that there are possible courses of action that need to be taken. I guess the biggest being deregulation, and just making the private sector more robust so that jobs can be created by the private sector. I really enjoyed this discussion, and I've enjoyed having you as panelists. And once again, thank you so much for your flexibility for this call.